Hello and welcome to another episode of the CTD Roundtable. Today I have Derrick and Misha from Aurascope joining me. They are two Kiwi founders who are helping business owners and growth chasers demystify some of what we would call the black box of visibility that large language models like ChatGPT, Gemini and Perplexity now pose in terms of being seen by potential customers and clients. Thank you for joining me today, guys. Everyone knows that there's both an element of discovery and also some conversion value to be had in these platforms, but understanding the how of realizing that potential often seems like guesswork. But by quantifying a business's position against their competitors, Aurascope gives you real feedback on how you're faring, as well as the exact actions you need to take to improve your AI visibility and win the emerging space. Before we get started though, for anyone who's not familiar with the terminology that surrounds traditional search engine optimization and its transition to encompass large language models, how do you guys define and differentiate between what would be SEO, AEO, and GEO as terms that people might see on LinkedIn or in conversation around the place?
I'll take this one, Marty. For anyone that has heard the term AEO and GEO, they're the same thing. I would recommend AEO because it stands for Answer Engine Optimisation. And what that implies is that you're influencing or becoming the answer to these AI models. GEO, just because I'm an engineering nerd, doesn't make sense. A generative engine optimization could be anything. There's many generative engines out there, and it doesn't imply that it's a large language model or AI chatbot. So AEO is my recommendation, but that's very opinionated. And SEO, well, that is the traditional old way where Google dominated the search monopoly and open sourced all their data and created a ranking keyword system called search engine optimization. And so the change is completely different. What we're seeing is that you can be the top ranked SEO company, but if you don't have the authority or the content or even the website's readability from an AI perspective, you're not going to show up as the answer. And if you don't, you're invisible. And so there's a crazy stat where a AI visitor is 5 times more valuable than a regular organic search engine traffic visitor because they're way more high intent. And for those reasons, the whole space is changing. Okay.
And I've heard SEO practitioners particularly refer to AEO or GEO and say it is SEO, but that's obviously not quite true.
That is correct. What we're seeing is with SEO, it has, well, first of all, SEO has a very solid structure, right? And also traditionally in the SEO game, the lag between what you put in and what you put out, is quite significant. Now, the reason why it's a different game, and it's not necessarily coming from just like your standard practices, but it's also how fast it is, right? So with AEO, first things comes first, good SEO means good AEO, but at the same time, what AEO requires, or these large language models, like they follow the EAT framework, right? So the customer or your brand needs to have the experience, expertise, authority, and trust. That's something that SEO doesn't necessarily take into consideration, right? It's all about the keywording. The brand stands in a completely different environment, so it's in its own game. AEO actually brings all of this together. So it's one collective thing. And this is where you need to think bigger when it comes to AEO, and you need to think faster. The rate at which you need to adopt and change things is putting you in this new high competitive realm.
One more thing I'd like to add to that is the only thing that makes SEO valuable in AEO perspective is if you are making the website more AI readable. And so all of those schemas and structures and clear headings, and those are good SEOs, and those are the only things that will move the needle in AI visibility. To become the answer, you must influence the citation, the source that AI uses, and then once you influence that, you may get a mention. And if you get a mention, you may get a recommendation. And that level of influence is exactly what Misha was talking about. It has to be much more, it has to be thought about differently.
I understand. And it seems like the traditional approach pre-large language model was that we were essentially optimizing for Google when the lion's share of search volume was in Google. That's what you essentially aimed for. Everyone was competing in the same space. With the transition into needing to consider answer engine optimization, is that making it harder for businesses to decide how to invest or how to structure their websites or their assets as well?
Every AI model provider is indexing their own version of the internet. So in a way, it makes it harder because you don't know which engine or AI to optimize for. But our methodology is different. You actually look at the underlying architecture, and it's just a large language model with the ability to search the web on your behalf. And maybe the Google starts releasing their more multimodal models where it can consume video and audio in the future. But for right now, it's a large language model that does a web search. And they all follow the same core architecture. So with that in mind, we try and influence citations. And if you influence that, it'll work universally in general principle across all the new modes of AI.
Excellent. So there's a commonality there where a track of optimization serves you in multiple spaces rather than having to try to, in the same way we used to look at our ranking in Google was basically our success metric for SEO, whether it's, how we're doing in terms of impressions, what we're doing in terms of clicks, and whether or not that traffic's converting. You do have a parallel model in the way that you can work for AEO.
So in terms of the metrics, Marty, that's it is slightly different with the AEO, right? So the game is still the rules of the game are still being written, right? So it's not necessarily the same thing as your traditional SEO. With AEO, majority of our customers, they talk about how we're getting maybe 2 to 3% of traffic coming through the GPT, whereas, the server logs showing a much higher volume, like significantly higher volumes. But the thing is, like, how do we convert these customers, or like not necessarily how do we convert these customers, but how do we prove that these customers are the ones that came through the large language model at the end, right? So the bot scrapes your website to generate an answer, but the customer may not necessarily click on that link from the ChatGPT. They just make a mental, they just make a mental note of, hey, this is the website that I want to go with. Later on in their own accord, they type in the website into the search engine and they click from there, right? If in traditional model in Google, you can attribute it to, hey, here's the click-through, here's the conversion, that sort of attribution is not necessarily possible in AEO, right? As a matter of fact, the traffic that you get through AEO is significantly smaller than what it actually is. So the metrics that we can track at the moment are the things like share of voice, which is your alternative thing to ranking number one in GPT. And anybody who tells you like, hey, we can help you to rank number one GPT is, selling you snake oil. There's no such thing. But then there's also the visibility, and to what Derrick mentioned earlier is the citations and mentions, right? So these are the things that you can definitely track. But from our experience and what we are trying to really work hard on is to show that correlation. We can't prove causation with large language model, but it's about the correlation. So just my 2 cents, I guess, on the metric side of things.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing I was going to say there is just that from what you're describing, it actually sounds like typically when we're talking a digital channel we usually look for that, what is a fairly linear click or tracking of, there's an attribution point. Whereas how you're describing it actually sounds a little bit more like traditional or real world marketing, where you have a share of voice, where you have a presence that leads to some other form of channel access to site. So I always used to see it referred to as kind of, good brand has a halo effect on a business. So you might not get, and I notice when I use something like Gemini or GPT, it's not exactly offering up links for me to leave platform. Seems to want to keep the user within platform, but I certainly take note of what I see in terms of when I'm asking a question, whether it's a query of, what should I do? Who should I use? Can I have, additional help to find a provider that might, be able to service my set of needs? I certainly notice that that I take that as a fairly strong recommendation of where I should, like if I'm looking for a doctor near me, or if I'm looking for a service business near me, I will take that as a fairly strong recommendation, like you're talking about the authority piece there and expertise, that if they're being referenced, I take it as fairly trustworthy, as opposed to being presented with a list of potential links that I might click.
And I love that you're saying it, Marty, because it's just the behavioral shift in through people is massive, right? So you've said it perfectly. You take it potentially at the face value. There's a lot more trust that's being put into these answers, and instead of clicking through 10 different links trying to find the option that really fits your needs, right? You potentially be presented with none. Or maybe like very limited amount of choices, right? These options are going to be very narrow. And I think at the beginning of the podcast, we did talk about how these queries have a much higher intent, therefore higher level of conversion.
Yes.
So it just tells you like how important it is to have that share of voice and be the authority in your domain. And that actually backs up some of the research that we did. So we caught up with a senior lecturer from the University of Auckland, and the point of discussion was, how does youth in particular adopt this technology? Now, the hypothesis that we had was that with younger people, you would assume that the rate at which they're adopting it, they will be very sophisticated in terms of asking very specific, very detailed questions, really laying it out like through long prompts. And therefore jumping to a answer, or like trusting the answer to almost 100% certainty. What we discovered was partially right. Now, the recommendations or the answer does get taken at, it gets taken at face value. So people trust the response. So they're willing to convert. The thing is that they're still not in the realm of long tail queries. So, for example, I know that Derrick and I would put long prompts that we'd be very specific about what we want. You as well, Marty, right? Like, what we found is actually the younger population is not like that. They're still using the large language model search through traditional short tail queries.
Interesting.
And they're still taking the answer at its face value. They're still trusting it.
Yes.
Right? Which we found to be really phenomenal.
Yes. Yeah.
One more thing I'd like to just add is AI. You go to AI to do or execute. You're not necessarily going to AI to find or search. But search is becoming a massive stepping stone to making a decision. And so when you go to AI, you're building something, or you're creating content, or you're specifically going to search for something, right? And that's why it's so much more high intent, and that's why we believe it so much, because the context and everything it knows, and we see the almost the psychological UI of the AI loading and taking its time to reason through things. These are all like indicators and signals that, we think it's working very hard for us, and therefore the answer is going to be very good, and then we trust it.
Absolutely. I certainly find that anything that I prompt through, particularly when you're switching modes, like if you go into thinking mode with Gemini or something like that, where I can see what's running in the background, it really does feel like what comes back is quite considered, rather than having to open, 5 tabs or 8 tabs of potential service providers that I might need to talk to for something, or whatever it is that I'm searching for or looking for information on at that point in time. I certainly find that concise output, it's essentially like the decision is somewhat made for me before I step forward, or that 10 is down to 3 as a consideration set for me to go from there. It doesn't seem to over-reference or give me more than sort of what I can easily make a decision on. That tends to, for me, and this is where I think the attribution piece drops off for people, is that it tends to be, for me, I'm then in searching in Google traditionally for that business, or I'm using maps to find them, or something like that. Or the impression is made for a later date and time where I come in as direct traffic or something else to the business, or I phone them separately. So there isn't that linked click-through rate that you might talk about in something like Search Console. So I completely understand what you're talking about there as far as ranking, citation, and being the answer effectively. Makes really good sense. It's a real flip-in mindset for a marketer or for a business owner as well, to think about a discovery, like a pre-Google discovery step might be the easiest way to describe it as well. That previously I go to Google with my intent, my problem, and now I'm potentially jumping into an LLM to talk about it instead. Now let's talk about the genesis of this idea as well. So from what I understand and what we've talked about in other conversations, you both had really amazing starts to your careers as engineers with Air New Zealand. It's a world away from what you're doing now. What did you learn while you were there that still influences how you work now? And what was it that makes two guys want to jump out of a structured environment like that and into something like the Wild West of AI?
Everyone loves asking this question because Air New Zealand is it's a great and big brand, and I would still say one of the best enterprises to work for. Obviously biased because I probably one of the only big great enterprises I've worked for, but it's won many awards, and I loved my time there. What I learned was I'm an engineer, so I joined Air New Zealand as a DevOps engineer, which was this role that you essentially automated software engineering and deployed it to the cloud. And so I was already thinking about like automating the software engineering lifecycle even before AI. And that was really interesting because now when AI has come in and essentially democratized all coding ability, anyone can download Claude Code or Codex or any of their AI models and produce code at the same quality and level as I'd say probably junior to intermediate engineers, because a senior engineer still thinks in systems and architecture that others cannot. Now that entire lifecycle can be even more automated. And so the way that I have really learned and evolved from my lessons at Air New Zealand is that we constantly try and automate the software delivery lifecycle of an engineer. And I've just been super passionate about that. And that's been like probably the takeaway. And I can touch on this, and I think Misha has his own perspective, but the reason why I left was I always had aspirations to be an entrepreneur. And I wanted to move at the speed of AI. And unfortunately, no enterprise in the world can do that. You can only do that as your own startup founder. And that's the sole reason. Nothing against the company. It's just they move too slow, but not their fault. You have to move slow. Yeah. And Misha has his point.
Yeah, definitely. So I am an engineer by training, but at Air New Zealand, I was working in more of a product space. And to Derrick's point, like it's an amazing organization. And I was very fortunate to be in such a dynamic and fast-paced team where we had opportunities to actually be able to deliver things in weeks as a matter of months, despite everyone's beliefs. And in terms of what I personally learned from and took with me from Air New Zealand, essentially, it's all about the people that you work with. And this is why when I left, it just felt right to be a co-founder with Derrick. So we both had the same aspiration and wanted to be entrepreneurs, And I'll be honest with you, it to me personally would always feel much better than you try and fail, as opposed to you never try and you think what would have happened. And the whole AI ecosystem, like the rate at which it was changing, I thought, well, now is possibly the best time to do this, right? And we'll be honest, we didn't have an idea of where it's going to lead to, because we did start with potentially services, but the long-term goal was always the product. That's how Aurascope came about. And one thing definitely that I've embraced on this whole entrepreneurial journey was that experimentation is the key to unlocking any form of opportunities, right? And experimenting fast. So in hindsight, I would say it's almost an equivalent. It's a lot easier to steal a bike and ask for forgiveness, being an entrepreneur, than being in a larger organization. So this is where we get to steal bikes all the time, Marty.
Yes, yeah. And you'd rather lose sleep over the stress of trying than regret it later in life that you never gave it a shot, right?
100%. And it's also, I guess, the mindset, right? It's a curiosity thing, right?
Yes.
I'm curious what the outcome of it would be.
Totally.
Regardless, good or bad, And now, at the end of the day, the data is data, right? And learnings are learnings, right? So it's just a matter of how you reapply them.
I know Misha and I have been doing late nights up until Thursday. So we've been past 12:01. And yesterday was the third late night in a row. And I was about to go to bed and I had this simultaneous moment where I was like, I love this. And I'm also ugh, but I hate it as well. But but it's a respect. It's a respect for the grind. And I would never work like this and have the passion and drive if it was for a company. I'll just tell you this right now. If I was working for someone, you couldn't ask me to move an extra bit of joule of energy if it wasn't for me. I'm like that. I'm super lazy when it comes to being managed, but if I become my own boss, I will work till the ends of the earth.
Yeah. I think that's when you find the switch internally that works for you, right?
Yeah.
I used to refer to this as clean stress or clean workload and investment of time versus what you'd refer to as dirty stress or just being overloaded with work. It's pretty hard to pursue the horizons that you're talking about with opportunity and what is the outcome of this or how far can I chase this thing when you are working in a larger organization. So with that freedom, all of a sudden you've got this almost boundless energy, or even if you're really tired, I'd imagine you guys are pretty tired today, that it still feels good turning up to work the next morning.
Oh, totally.
That's a amazing positive momentum to have in what you're building, and it drives value, and it has a value of its own in the background, which isn't always measured, but it's extremely hard to replicate at scale.
Perfect.
There are teams I've worked with where within small teams there's a dynamic or there's a degree of productivity that just doesn't work at the larger headcount, or you find that the burden of work isn't shared in the same way, and it turns into what you're talking about where adding that extra joule or that little bit of energy becomes really, really tough. And that's where you start having the I don't know, I can't type moments. And even when you are doing something yourself and you're getting that reward back out of it, or you're chasing something, you're chasing your answer effectively, it's okay to love it and hate it at the same time. You don't have to love every moment of it. You can be like, why am I here? But at the same time, there are moments within that day or that week or that sprint of work that you're doing that are the reward that keep you going for the next one. I really love that. Can I also ask as well, you've mentioned really briefly there that it was a bit of a journey to get to the Aurascope concept itself. You didn't jump straight into it out of Air New Zealand. So in terms of an opportunity, you understand that it's AI was the space, it was moving exceptionally fast, uptake that I've never seen before from even my side of the tools. What was it that got you to the point where you recognized that Aurascope was an opportunity, or that there was a gap in the market that you could potentially fill with that?
Definitely a lot of failings, so Aurascope wasn't necessarily the first product we tried to validate.
Of course.
Right. And,
yeah.
There were learnings that we took out from the previous ones. But we did have that idea, like, hey, how does AI search actually is going to behave? But the moment we've decided that we definitely need to do it is probably best described by Derrick's story, which is more like on a more personal note.
Yeah, I think Misha and we were both using AI every single day, right? Like, you have to, if you are considering yourself as an AI native agency. So AI search was probably 50% of our work function. And then we started realizing that a lot of the biggest buying decisions that we will make, annual contracts or just tech stack decisions that influence automation and engineering projects, were done with AI recommendations. And then I asked Misha, I was like, is this just in our bubble of AI, or is this going to actually diffuse into society? And that is the personal question and the experiment that I ran when I said, okay, I'm going to go to Bali and I'm going to propose to my now fiance. So we succeeded. And the way that I did it, thank you. The way that I did it was thank you. The way that I would control that entire experience was not searching through Google. I would only use AI search. So every recommendation for every restaurant, every experience that we were going to do, every logistics, everything, AI search. And what I did was I would take it at face value. Like, the experiment was, don't look past the first or second recommendations. You're trying to essentially use AI as your travel agent, essentially. And that was a 90% perfect experience. There was one recommendation that I wish it didn't make, but what is the rate if you did it via Google, or any other method by yourself? And that was the moment I came back. I was like, Misha, this is going to change. It's worked personally in our business and it's worked externally. It's going to happen. And then all the metrics started following that. And I think this is the year, right, Misha?
100%. What was really annoying is the fact that he came back all relaxed while the grind
I needed that break.
Yeah, or sometimes it's the break that lets you find what the next step is, or it gives you the space to consider it under a different frame. And I guess the thing there in terms of opportunity is how many other businesses wish they could have been in your consideration set while you were traveling through Bali, or making your decisions before, during the trip. How many other businesses would have benefited from better visibility in that space?
Oh, 100%. It's if you wanted to be, and I knew as I was getting these recommendations that it was only because these businesses were optimized for AI. I knew that I was missing probably a wealth of amazing experiences that weren't AI visible. But that wasn't the experiment. It was, can I get a good experience with people that are AI recommended? And it worked. So now it became obvious, well, how do we unlock the invisible layer of businesses that would have given me an even greater experience, but they just weren't in the recommendation, right? That was the question. Yes. And that's what we're trying to answer.
Yeah, so the ones that were fortunate enough to be there already, and the ones that can then optimize into that space. It's really interesting. Yeah. And when you talk about that, I guess that's the extreme experiment of guiding an entire holiday, planning through to fulfillment via AI. But what's your take on the impact that AI is having both for the consumer side, but also the marketer and the business itself? Are there some extremely under or overhyped aspects of that in terms of what you see people talking about at the moment?
From what we've observed, there are different categories, right? Now, we've definitely seen an example where some just choose to think about it for the tick box exercise because it's a pressure from the top, and it's just being the AI hype cycle. There are those like yourself, Marty, who are really thinking about the space, right, and really trying to understand it and apply and adopt to it. And perhaps like this is a sort of a category that we work closely with, right? Because at the end of the day, it will change how we behave, how customers get the information. And from the observation, like it's those who tackle the space early are the ones who are actually going to reap their reward, right? But then even when it comes to those who are trying to understand it, there are those who have the capacity to execute, and there are those who don't. So that opens up another whole can of worm, because it's a lot of work up front, but it's for the long reward.
The role of a marketer is changing, Marty. So with AI search, what it gives you is a very real mirror into my role is completely changing. There is this piece of engineering which Aurascopes can solve. But then there's the other aspect, which is how does this AI, this quasi-intelligence, perceive and my brand and my entity? And that is very, very hard to solve. And there's no real engineering way to solve that. You just have to, just like you convince a human through trust, you have to build it. And so the way that you influence brand and the engineering side together is not in the day-to-day role of coming in and looking at the metrics and maybe producing a nice little Canva, design and pushing that out as content. It's not going to work anymore. You have to do experiments, and you have to do very quick feedback of those experiments. You have to test a ton of different A, B, C, D, E, F designs and see which sticks. And you have to do it at breakneck speed because the models are changing at that level. And that's why we believe that people like yourself and the clients that you help that come on early are in the best position to outsize their visibility and their share of voice. And then they build the muscle of, okay, well, this is how I produce content to build authority in the long term of now AI recommending me and my brand's entity in 6 months' time. I think that's the holistic view of how it's changing.
From my side, in terms of the marketing element, the biggest shifts I've seen were, so believe it or not, when I was studying digital marketing was one paper, so that's quite a while ago. But the biggest shift initially when I came into the industry was accountability through tracking, and all of a sudden everything was a metric and you could look at anything versus just buying space in a magazine or ads on a radio or TV or something like that. So the accountability of a marketer shifted phenomenally. It seems like the next skill set that a marketer or a business or anyone in a business that's involved with marketing needs is the mindset of what you're talking about with breakneck speed for adoption, testing, implementation, loop. And I think a lot of people aren't ready to do that or still trying to pretend like they don't need to, that they can keep doing like what you're talking about with we can just produce assets from Canva, or here's the templates I use in Canva or something like that. It seems like that adoption of AI should fundamentally change the way you work and what you should expect to be doing day to day, week to week, but also what you can now learn or what you should be able to test and iterate on and then scale. Seems like it's shifted phenomenally. And that mindset is something that I certainly look for when we talk to anyone, if we were ever hiring, or it's a very interesting gauge for me when I talk to businesses. where they're at on that adoption, or on where they're at on that, I guess you call it, continuum, in terms of like how far down the track they are with that, or whether they are, aggressively focused on it, whether they are, and then finding learnings that they can implement, which I think is one of the things I want to talk about with Aurascope as well, is being able to actually implement something that moves the needle versus just making themselves busier. Because I certainly find that it's easy to make yourself busier, and without something like the quantified position of a business and with large language models, you are guessing a lot of the time. And if you're guessing without result, or if you're testing unreliably, you're finding kind of false signals that you're then chasing or adopting in your workload. So I think demystifying some of that guesswork is exceptionally powerful in helping people work faster with a better outcome more often. You're just shifting the odds effectively.
Oh, totally. You know who I think is actually in the best position to become a marketer if they're not? It's designers. Because designers have a taste of brand, and designers will learn how to do copy. And so really it'll become a game of like designing the right content or designing the right visuals to capture brand. And if you're not a marketer and you're a designer, I think that you're in best position.
Interesting. I like that. I think it's never been a better time to work in marketing without needing any formal training, in short.
Yeah,
but it is
yeah,
nice,
that is
certainly
true.
nice to have some foundations in what a brand is and what differentiates a brand to avoid homogenization. Cool. And I just also wanted to say that obviously, as I've been using Aurascope, it's been a chance for me to understand with our clients now what actually is going on behind the scenes of what otherwise looks like a magic box. And we're starting to demystify some of what is driving that visibility and that citation across ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity as an example. And that's a real relief for someone on my side who knows there's an opportunity out there, and there's work to be done, but where am I at and what could I do differently, I think is probably the thing that gives you a competitive advantage in that space, rather than saying, even if you were just ranking alone and saying you're here and then do some guesswork to try and advance. I think that's probably one of the strongest points of having used Aurascope myself within a business, is that there are actionable elements that I can take and I can start working on with even traditional SEO, with developers, with content creation, to start to augment how we are referenced and how we're ranking. When I first went through that process with you, it was really cool to see it and be able to understand the opportunity immediately, which I think a lot of platforms will sell you a dashboard as an example, but not something that's actionable that I can work on, or that just provides really generic sets of changes. Like I work with paid media tools that just spit out generic sets of changes. Google Ads is a real culprit for it, where it essentially just wants you to up your budget. And one of my long-term frustrations with Search Console, as an example, is that, wonderful insight into tracking a brand's movements over time. And if you're then actioning changes and monitoring, yes, there's some slow uptake there as well, but what should I work on right now is extremely empowering for a business owner. I think it is the point of differentiation for using Aurascope particularly. Would it be okay to jump into a demo together and run through a business of kind of your choice, and we can see how that works in person for anyone that's following along on video?
100%. I will do the screen share, and we have chosen a brand that everyone knows. You have most likely gone and bought something from this company, Woolworths. Previously, the funny thing with Woolworths is I don't say Woolworths. I don't think anyone in New Zealand says Woolworths after the rebrand. We still say Countdown. What you're seeing right now is our window into the black box of AI visibility. So we kind of already talked about like how the landscape is changing and what we think is the best. And don't get me wrong, there are many tools out there that will sell you a dashboard, but that's not the value here. We use the metrics. The new metrics are you being visible? So we measure across 3 different platforms. maybe I'll increase my screen for those that are. I think we measure 3 different platforms: ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Gemini. And the reason for that is they are the largest search volume traffic. So we're seeing the difference amongst how these different AI models even mention and cite your brand. The second is share of voice. So now AI is going to, in the same answer, give you others to go based on the query. And so in a bunch of prompts that we measured, and I will show those prompts later, the competitors have shown up in various different percentages. And then the domains are what we believe is the lifeblood of AI, right? So when you get a citation, you're most likely to get a mention. And that citation also corresponds to other competitors being a mention. So really, our recommendation engine is very strongly built on analyzing this layer with a lens on the mentions and share of voice. But if you have people out there telling you, hey, I should only just optimize for specific prompts, prompts can be in the millions, and they can be very, very unique to the customer. And so I think this is a very good point of us saying, like, well, how do we measure AI visibility when it's in the millions? It's really down. And I think, Misha, you explained this perfectly well. Like, what is our prompt methodology?
Yeah, so Derrick said it perfectly. You can't necessarily just predict what people are saying, right? And because everyone's unique, and even a slightest change in words, in a word in a prompt brings you a completely different result. The way we do it is, well, first we really build that digital profile of the organization that we're scanning. And we've done a whole lot of research that actually shows how people are using the large language models when it comes to the querying, right? With that in mind, and academia research, so these 3 key elements, we bring it together to generate the prompts that we believe would be around what people may search for. Now, this is not the only thing. When these prompts are loaded and the dashboard's been tracking for about a week, what we also do, we actually provide a bit of that, what you might say, like a bit of like that glove service, where we actually also do keyword ranking, right? So the approach we like to take, and because AEO is a new space, and I feel for anyone trying to jump into it and try to learn all of it, we actually want to bridge that gap, and we want to ensure that customers are actually getting the best value for it. So we do have these monthly engagements where we actually do the keyword analysis through the prompts and seeing whether we're on the right trajectory. But not just that, we also try to understand which are the types of personas the business is trying to target. Prompts are effectively your strategy. They're your window to the AI world. If this quarter you're focusing on, okay, I want to focus on bulk buyers, right? You create a prompt library for that, and you try to address their need, whether it would be through the content, through third-party authority, building blogs, whatever the strategy the business may have at the time. If the next quarter is all about, I don't know, like, the top shelf stuff, you adopt your prompts accordingly. The thing is being clear and precise about the strategy that you're trying to pursue, because even when recommendation is given to you and it says like, hey, do this, and Derrick will show it later when it comes to recommendations, apply a single change across the entire big website could take months. The idea is how you be laser focused about it. And you don't necessarily need to do like a polished change across the entire thing. You just need to be strategic and do it as if you're building a puzzle.
Yeah, I think it's just the prompt strategy works. And what that implies is, well, now we can show you how you perform across each of those prompts. And this is the whole like unlocking the AI visibility layer, and it'll start to really kick in. So for example, for someone messaging, how do I order groceries online for same day delivery, what we see is Woolworths is not mentioned at all, but ChatGPT will say, use a major supermarket, Woolworths, formerly Countdown, as we were talking about earlier,
Yes.
New World, Pack and Save, right? And the site, so this is an example of an AI giving an answer. And then you'll see the cited sources, which is the lifeblood of an answer, exactly as I mentioned. And within this prompt as well, you get access to, okay, well, how did Perplexity do it? Well, Perplexity also included Milk Run, which I believe is also a part of Woolworths as a subsidiary. And then Gemini, again. So Woolworths is good. It's been mentioned all three across, and that's why we give it a overall visibility score. We track the number of times that brand's been mentioned across the answers, and the sentiment is the whole brand thing. So you know how we said there's the engineering part? Well, there's the brand part, right? And a brand is broken down in three different dimensions. Does AI positively discuss your brand? Is AI positioning your brand in the right answer, in the top or the bottom? Because as we also learned that you can have, if you're not in the top or bottom, if you're somewhere in the middle, you may be missed. And then personality, is it being accurate? Is it not hallucinating prices or information, or maybe pulling in other things that are incorrect, right? So that's all of it. Each prompt is measured and then collated together to give you that overall visibility that you see here. And because it's a large brand in New Zealand, and we're tracking specifically the New Zealand locale, we would expect like visibility to be quite significant. But if we changed that location, let's just say the United States, I can assure you that Woolworths will not be top visibility. And that's also a really key indicator right here, where the location, the simulation of where we're searching also matters, right? One more quick thing before I go into the real like jewel of what our platform does. And maybe you could talk to this point, Misha, and then I can dive deep into the recommendations. Is our brand.
Yeah, 100%. So with what we've observed while working with multiple customers was that they actually understand their competitors. However, what we also found was that, and what they've discovered is that the competitors come from, and blindside them anytime. So the way we like to do it is we like to give options to for customers to track their competitors they know about, but also we use our tool to essentially extract others that are being mentioned from the answer to give them a broader visibility on the industry and what's happening in there. The idea is to give them full visibility on who's up and coming, who they should be monitoring, and what they should be doing about it, right? And also, just to put it in a more granular perspective, we do track historical share of voice as well. So even though the overview shows the overall share of voice, we actually do track how does each competitor change and grow or shrink over time.
I've noticed that with our clients that there's now starting to be a trend over time that we can start to observe, and I really like that blend of my perceived or subjective from within the business competitor set versus what else is out there, because when it comes to discovery, at the end of the day, there's a model running in between here that's sitting between you and a consumer or you and a client that is going to make recommendations, and you need to know who you're actually up against in that space, or like you say, the up-and-comer that would otherwise blindside you, and take that share of voice and platform, and potentially you lose, as an example, when we were talking earlier about things like the halo effect for discovery, and then whether it's inquiry or session to site through other source. Otherwise, it's just a what happened, as opposed to it's guesswork rather than, oh, hang on, I can actually see here that there's a risk with Costco if I work at Woolworths or something like that. And there's obviously different stakeholders that would find different areas of this platform really important or interesting to monitor as well. Like strategically, there's an element here around our prompts. I also find it really interesting how you guys break down the prompts by category as well. Then there's the overviewing, the dashboard, that component where you're like, how am I tracking? How can I present this internally? And I think it is really interesting when you start to say there's a lot happening in the background, especially when you're looking at 3 different LLMs that you're trying to work across here, that distilling these elements for somebody who is in either a marketing team, whether they're junior, senior, whether they're presenting to someone else in senior leadership, or whether it's for just a business owner that's curious themselves as to how they're performing against their competitors and what they could do, trying to present that information across different spaces and to empower or to give each of those different stakeholders something to take away as part of, like, it's not a marketing only function at the end of the day. There's business decisions being made around these things that need to be guided as opposed to guessed, I think is the best way I can describe it. The piece I love the most is just the recommendations element for what I could actually do. Like, say I work at Woolworths in this space. I have either, kept up with or not kept up with AI as it becomes a part of my consumers day to day. And rather than having to go and copy something that's working in a different market or that a guru talking about a different industry might be recommending to me, I see that fairly often, or I hear that fairly often, particularly through SEO, that there's actually a set of recommendations that I can take on that affect different parts of how you are scoring my brand at the end of the day. And I think that is the special piece to me, especially, is being able to take something and actually work on it actively in the business.
Yes, of course. And this is where we try and solve that dirty question on attribution, right? Yeah. We don't want to misattribute, but it's almost impossible to attribute. So the way that we've devised this is we built an internal metric called brand aura. And if for those that of you have picked it up, our platform is called Aurascope because it helps you figure out your brand aura in the AI space. And so the brand aura is our 5 key pillars that are both academically researched and primarily experiment run to determine that these are the strongest indicators of increasing your visibility through the influence of citations. And I think I need to make that very clear because citations is the key here. If anyone just says, I'll optimize for just this one prompt, then you're stabbing in the dark and you're creating a bunch of resources for no reason. So there's 2 things, page structure and AI readable markup. These are the gatekeepers of AI search visibility. Imagine a library, an expansive library of books, but they're all over the floor and you trip over as you try to get to the content. It doesn't matter how great your blogs and your media is, you will not be readable and therefore you will be skipped. And so these 2 focus on that area. And then once you've got the house hierarchy in order, you can focus on the other signals, such as, do you have fresh content? Because if you have a modern date signal, then you're going to be in a modern query that talks about near me or any sort of time sensitivity, or in general, it just wants recent information. And then content coverage, which is, remember the prompts that we were monitoring? Well, you're going to have to also look into covering content for those prompts. Otherwise, your competitors that do have that blog post will be cited. And third-party authority is by far one of the strongest citation influence metrics out there. When you have another institution that is in high authority, and this is the SEO element where it has a backlink to your website, you're going to have third-party authority, and therefore your citation will improve. And based on those pillars, exactly, we tell you the recommendations to focus on. So say you wanted to improve your AI readable markup, we're going to click on this particular this particular focus. And we say product schema enables AI engines to directly pass items for recommendations and comparisons. In New Zealand supermarket industry, we are seeing 39% higher citation. So this is the academic piece on why this matters. Then we tell you exactly what to do. And we give you exactly the particular pages that would be of value to target. And that is based on backlink API. We say that Pack and Save dominates lower price queries. They do have, their brand is known for lower price queries, but they're also would have better machine readable product based on our analysis of their website. And we've got various different queries and how to implement. And so when you copy this, you can now take this recommendation in Markdown format to any system or ticket system or even your AI itself to help you do it.
Yeah, for me, the exceptional thinking that's gone into this is why it matters, what I need to do about it, and then where I need to do that in one place, with the ability to then action it effectively off the back of this. Takes you from, like, it doesn't matter if you haven't got much experience in traditional SEO before you start looking at AEO. This will guide you to taking those first steps. Like, for me, as an example, when we first spun this up with a client running it, we had a 0 out of 10 score in one space. It was pretty easy. It was for content freshness. It's pretty easy to start resolving that, and I know who to work with immediately to be able to start resolving some of those issues. And those incremental changes that would never have come up in any other discussion I was having with anyone. The only thing I'd been recommended previously was, you should put some FAQs on some of your service pages, as an example, which feels like what I'll refer to as like kind of generic guru type advice that, yes, it may help, but everyone else is probably doing it as well. And it's not actually specific to my business. Like, what are those particular FAQs? Or how should that page be structured? Or how do I know those are going to get picked up? And will they actually be helping me towards being cited more often? Yes or no? I think that is the differentiator, and that's what I love so much about it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I applaud the thinking that went into it. It's so cool to have something that is both incredibly deep in analysis and also so helpful to be able to action as well. Like, it's multiple people or teams under one roof essentially working, which I find phenomenal.
One thing I would just like to point out, Marty, and really appreciate your kind feedback. But this is exactly what, we take it to heart, like, what you as a customer say. Before we even launched Aurascope, we actually had 2 cohorts of customers just literally using the platform and helping us build it. The vision that we had for it was we didn't want to build another platform that just overwhelms you with a whole lot of data, and essentially just chucks it all at you, making it seem like all of this is important. But whereas a matter of fact, let's be honest, there's even looking at some of the bigger SEO products, I'm not going to name them, but sometimes you don't need 90% of what they're trying to show you. So the idea in this very loud and crowded AI space, we thought, well, why don't we just reduce the noise and only show things that matter? So you have that laser focus that you can put towards, really growing your brand presence in AI search. That's a very simple thought process that went into it, and that's what we still stand by. It. So we only build what customers are asking for. We're not building for the hype. At the end of the day, there's some who could be telling us, hey, you need to do all these fantastic, quirky, high-tech things. It's like, no, because that's not what our customers actually want, and how do we know? Well, because they tell us, and when there's a general share of voice of, what they're asking for, then it's worth building, and that's just how we operate.
And what do you say to a business owner then who's kind of on the fence when they're considering investment into optimizing their website for citation through ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, or other LLMs as well?
I want to tell this business owner, really think first principally. I think first principle thinking is one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves, because it cuts through hype and noise very quickly. So I want you to ask these 3 questions. Do you believe AI is going to be super transformative for your industry? Yes or no is a pretty big question. Do you believe that AI is going to search on behalf of your customers? And do you think that is going to grow as an acquisition channel? Number two. And then number three is, do you believe that someone that gets recommended by AI will convert higher or be a higher quality lead for you, right? If all those three are yes, then most 100% start investing in AI search now. If you are no in any of them, then don't. And personally, I think that's a bad mistake, because we're so deep in the space and we see the trajectory, and we see these internet companies such as Cloudflare that host 20% of the world's internet say that AI traffic will surpass human traffic. So despite all of these like signals and metrics, and you still don't believe, at the end of the day, you are the business owner. So I'm not going to try and ask you to spend on things that you do not believe. But we believe this. And if you are one of those business owners where those three questions are yes, then most definitely start measuring now, because you have the ability to outsize yourself through these changes. And when you start influencing those citations, I can tell you, you'll start getting, oh, ChatGPT referred, when you ask your customers in the survey or a CRM, how did you get here? You'll start hearing ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Perplexity a lot more. I trust that.
Probably something I also like to add to it. We're still in the very early game of AO, as I previously mentioned. So think about it like this. If you knew what Apple is going to be like in, say, 20 years, would you invest in it early? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, it's a compounding effect of benefits that you can potentially start reaping earlier than most. So, and traditionally, it's well known that New Zealand has a sort of a culture where they love to test things and love to try things, but they're a bit slow on adoption curve. And those who do adopt things earlier, they tend to get ahead earlier. So what I would like to say, anybody who's getting into this game right now, they actually have an early competitive advantage, and they're going to be building it out. Once everyone jumps into it, it's like with SEO, it's going to end up costing more and more and more. And, they're not going to have the same time luxury of building their authority through AI systems. So
yeah, I certainly see SEO as exceptionally crowded space in terms of moving the needle can be really difficult at times. So I think when you see an emerging space like this, why would you ever pass up on the chance to develop a competitive advantage when it's pretty much on a plate in front of you right now, particularly when you're being guided as to what you could do to capitalize on that? So the opportunity for me would be start experimenting, or at least start getting some visibility to understanding where you are at and what is possible before other people jump on that potential market share out there, or position yourself for success. So as more of this adoption takes place, that you are ready to capitalize on it would be I think the best thing you could consider in a business. It has to be a space you consider. And given that rate of adoption that you're seeing and how you're talking about their AI traffic taking more and more of a percentage of what's online, what is next for Aurascope? Is it going to be a market expansion, a broadening of product? What are you thinking?
Most definitely a market expansion here, Marty. New Zealand, been raised here since I was one. I love the country to the core, but we are small and we don't move as fast. And a lot of the pressure comes from boards and internal pressure, which is not actually conducive to a fast-moving environment. So Australia is the next great best lift and shift, because a lot of the learnings from sales, marketing, engineering, and the relationship building that were built in New Zealand is transferable. So it's like very natural conduit to like that next area. But our aspirations don't stop there. I think we would decide if we would go APAC or US and really tackle this massive market and this TAM that is this expanding. And so that is our thinking. Anything I missed, Misha?
No, that's well summarized, Derrick.
Beautiful. I would say that is it's really cool to hear a business that's working in a kind of a SaaS or product space talk like that, when most of the people I deal with and clients I deal with are particularly, there's a physical product involved, and the barriers to entry for them into Australia is always the stepping stone. It's usually, I've got my sights on the US, but I'll start with Australia. I'll learn about shipping international, I'll learn about taxes, things like that as I go into Australia, and then I'll look at the US afterwards. I think you guys have got some amazing advantages and tailwinds to be able to play on, to be able to make those leaps relatively quickly, and I really look forward to seeing what you do with it.
Thank you, Marty.
Appreciate it, Marty.
Cool. So that was Derrick and Misha, the co-founders of Aurascope. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I really do love what you're doing in the space, and like I said, I'm incredibly excited to see where it takes you and what you can become. If any businesses tuning in today are interested in having a one-to-one demo of Aurascope, you can head to their website, www.aurascope.co, or find them on LinkedIn. The guys are amazing. They will take you through exactly what you need to see, understand, and do on your website to be cited more often, more visible to customers, and have more inquiries, traffic, and dominate the space that's emerging in front of us. I'll leave links in the comments and notes as well, but thanks for tuning in. That's us for this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.